Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Scott Hargrave found strangers tearing down his family's hand-built bridge, he didn't just see wood splintering, he saw war. What began as a quiet life in the hills turned into a brutal clash with a corrupt HOA empire. They came for his land. They had no idea who they were messing with. I grew up believing that some things should never be touched by the greed of modern life. The wooden bridge that crosses the Hargrave River is one of them. My grandfather built it by hand back in the 70s. Every plank he hammered, every bolt he tightened, carried his stubborn pride. My father used to say that the bridge was not just wood and nails, but the very spine of our family's land, the line that connects generations. Now I am 42, retired from my work as an investigator for the district attorney's office, and that bridge is my only lifeline to my home, a secluded estate sprawled over 40 acres in the northern hills of Georgia. No bridge, no way in or out. Life here is supposed to be quiet. I hunt, I fix fences, I ride an old ATV down to the river in the evenings. The closest neighbors are a few miles away, or at least that's how it used to be. About 7 years ago, a bunch of developers carved up the ridge to the south and built their playground of luxury mountain cottages. They named it Fox Hollow Ridge, like it was something poetic, rather than rows of overpriced wooden boxes with fake stone facades. With the cottages came the Homeowners Association, or as I like to call them, the neighborhood cult. And leading that cult was Karen Delacroix. Karen and I have had our share of exchanges. She's the type who thinks property lines are just suggestions and that everyone must bend to the collective will of her little empire. I've refused every invitation to join their HOA since day one. Every year they send a letter for the benefit of the community to ensure consistent aesthetics. All that nonsense. I've told them repeatedly that my land is private, registered, and entirely outside their jurisdiction. Still, Karen behaves as if my refusal is a personal insult. A few months ago, she even had the nerve to leave me a proposal suggesting I allow Fox Hollow to extend their walking trails across my property, promising mutual advantages. Translation: free access to my land for her crowd. I burned that letter in my fire pit. The bridge has always been a sore point with them. Karen claims it's unsafe, that it ruins the view for the residents who stare down the valley from their decks. Once she cornered me at the general store and said, "Aren't you worried about liability? What if someone falls through that thing?" I told her, "Karen, nobody falls through my bridge because nobody's supposed to be on it but me." She glared like I'd just insulted her entire bloodline. 2 weeks ago, I started noticing strange things. A white SUV with tinted windows parked at the turnoff near my property gate. Some orange surveyor flags staked suspiciously close to the bridge. One morning, I found a flimsy notice taped to my mailbox. Notice of scheduled safety inspection, Hargrave River Bridge. No signature, no official seal, just some cheap printed form with a fake-sounding Community Infrastructure Committee at the bottom. I laughed at first, thinking it was a bad joke, but I kept that paper. My gut told me this wasn't just Karen's usual pestering. Last Friday, I ran into Old Man Dale, a neighbor who lives a few miles down the road. He leaned against his pickup and spat tobacco before saying, "You know, I heard Fox Hollow tried the same thing with the Benson property last year. They claimed a retaining wall was dangerous, had it bulldozed, and forced the Bensons to sell the place cheap. Then one of Karen's buddies bought it." I felt my stomach knot. I know how these games work. I've seen this kind of slow squeeze before, but usually in corporate boardrooms. Not on a damn mountain ridge. That evening, I went down to the bridge. The sun was bleeding out behind the tree line, and the boards glowed like old amber. I ran my hand along the handrail, rough and warm from decades of weather. I swore then and there that no one was going to lay a hand on it without going through me. My family's name is carved into the first plank. My father etched it with a hunting knife the day I turned 18. That bridge has seen decades of storms, floods, and hell, even my first clumsy kiss. I wasn't about to let Karen Delacroix or her HOA thugs make it another notch on their trophy wall. The next morning, a new letter arrived. It wasn't even in an envelope. A single sheet of paper typed in bold caps. "Final warning, unsafe structure subject to removal. You have been notified." That was it. No signature, no authority cited, nothing but the stench of arrogance. I stood there on my porch, coffee in hand, and muttered, "Over my dead body." The day started like any other, with the hum of my truck's engine cutting through the morning fog on Highway 17. I'd spent the night in Atlanta picking up supplies, cedar boards, paint, and some gear I needed for repairs around the estate. My buddy Trevor rode shotgun, sipping black coffee from a thermos like it was rocket fuel. Trevor's a former Marine, built like a wall of oak and about as subtle as a hammer. He came down for a few weeks to get some air and escape the noise, as he calls it. I didn't know then just how much noise we were about to find. We turned off the main road onto the gravel path that winds through the trees and leads to my bridge. The sight that greeted us made my stomach drop. There was an excavator parked right on the far end of the bridge, its metal claw already tearing through the planks. Half of the structure was gone, the boards and beams scattered in the river like dead limbs. A group of men in neon vests stood around acting like they owned the place, and there, perched at the edge of my property with a smug expression plastered on her face, was Karen Delacroix. "Stop the truck!" I barked. Trevor slammed the brakes, gravel crunching under the tires. I was out of the cab before the engine even stopped rattling. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, storming toward them. Karen turned to me slowly, as if she'd been expecting this. She held a folder in her hands, a stack of papers that looked like they'd been printed by a middle schooler on a cheap inkjet. "Scott," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness, "you've been notified. This bridge is an unsafe, unauthorized structure. We're removing it for the safety of the community and the county. You'll thank us later." Notified? I grabbed the nearest paper from her hand. No official stamps, no county seal. Just a letterhead with the words Fox Hollow Ridge Safety Committee. My laugh was bitter. "This isn't a notification, it's a piece of garbage. You have no right to touch my property." "You're being unreasonable, as usual," Karen shot back. "This bridge could collapse at any moment. We're doing what's necessary." "Like hell you are," I growled. I stepped past her toward the excavator. A wiry guy with a shaved head stood on the machine, looking unsure. "Cut the engine now," I told him. He hesitated, glancing at Karen, who gave him a sharp nod to keep going. I didn't even think. I climbed onto the platform, trying to pull the lever to stop the machine, when another worker, a big man with grease-stained gloves, grabbed my shoulder. "Sir, you need to step back." He started, but I swung around and shoved him off. Things went from bad to worse fast. 3 men closed in on me, shouting over one another. Trevor was out of the truck by then, moving like a freight train. "Hands off," he barked, yanking one guy away from me. For a second, it felt like we'd regained control, but they had numbers, and they weren't shy about using fists. Someone hit me in the ribs, hard. The pain shot through me like fire. Another hand grabbed my shirt and dragged me down toward the gravel. I saw Karen standing there with her phone out, recording. "Make sure you get this," she told one of the workers. "They're attacking us." "Attacking?" I coughed, trying to get up, but a boot slammed into my shoulder. Trevor tackled one of them, throwing punches like his life depended on it, but even he was getting overwhelmed. I didn't know it at the time, but Trevor had his small body cam clipped to his vest, quietly recording everything, even as they hit us, even as they dragged me through the dirt. The camera caught every second, Karen barking orders like a general and her crew tearing into us. The sound of wood cracking ripped through the chaos. I turned my head just in time to see the excavator's claw pull down another section of the bridge. A whole support beam gave way, splashing into the river below. My grandfather's bridge, the one I swore would stand as long as I lived, was crumbling before my eyes. I tried to push up again, but someone kicked me hard in the side. I gasped, rolling onto my back, staring at the gray sky. The shouting blurred into one ugly roar. Karen's voice cut through it, cold and sharp. "Finish the job. Faster, before they call anyone." Trevor got one last swing in before a man hit him across the jaw. I remember his head snapping back, the look of raw fury in his eyes, and then the ground rushing up to meet me when someone shoved me face first into the dirt. My head was pounding, my ribs felt broken, and through the ringing in my ears, I heard the final groan of timber collapsing into the river. By the time the dust settled, I was bleeding, my shirt torn, and half the bridge was gone. Nothing but jagged beams sticking out like broken teeth. Karen stood above me, shaking her head like I was some kind of child. "You should have listened," she said, and turned away as if this was just another day in the office. When I woke up, I wasn't sure where I was. The ceiling above me was white, the lights too bright, and the sharp smell of disinfectant told me everything I needed to know. A hospital. My ribs felt like someone had set them on fire, and every breath stabbed like broken glass. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain ran down my side, forcing me back into the bed with a groan. "Easy there, cowboy," a familiar voice said. I turned my head and saw Trevor sitting in a chair next to me, his left arm in a cast and a nasty bruise covering half his jaw. He looked like hell, but he was still smirking. "You look worse than I do." And that's saying something. "What happened?" My voice was rough, like I'd swallowed sand. "What happened?" Trevor leaned forward. "Your HOA friends turned into a demolition crew with a side gig in assault. They finished off the bridge, and we both got our asses handed to us. I called for an ambulance when I saw you go down, but guess who got here first? The sheriff's deputies. And they weren't exactly rushing to help." I cursed under my breath. It wasn't surprising. This was Karen's territory, and I had a sinking feeling that she had people in her pocket. "Did they take our statements?" "Oh, they took statements all right," Trevor said, his smirk fading. "From Karen and her goons first. And guess what? According to them, you started it. You attacked their workers without warning. The door opened before I could respond, and a man in a tan sheriff's uniform walked in, a clipboard tucked under his arm. His badge read, C. Mason. He looked like the kind of guy who chews gum instead of thinking. "Mr. Hargrave," he said, his tone polite, but with that edge of suspicion, "I need to ask you a few questions about what happened out there." I narrowed my eyes. "How about you ask the people who tore down my bridge and put me in this bed?" He cleared his throat. "We have multiple witnesses stating that you became aggressive and tried to interfere with a lawful safety operation. Do you have any evidence that contradicts their statements?" I wanted to laugh. "Lawful? Nothing about that clown show was lawful." "I have video," I said. "Trevor's body cam recorded everything." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Body cam? You're telling me your friend had a camera on him?" "Always does," Trevor muttered, holding up his phone. "It's on here. The file's damaged. They knocked me into the damn river, but I've got most of it." The deputy didn't look thrilled. "We'll need to review that, but for now, we can't assume." "You better assume fast," I snapped, my voice sharp despite the pain. "Because if you think I'm taking the fall for some HOA demolition stunt, you're out of your mind." The deputy scribbled something on his clipboard and stepped back, his tone going neutral. "We'll look into it." Then he left, like he couldn't get out of the room fast enough. Trevor waited until the door closed. "Yeah, they'll look into it right after they bury it." I lay back against the pillow, anger boiling in my chest. Karen had them exactly where she wanted, spinning the narrative, painting us as violent trespassers on my own damn property. "We need that footage," I said, my jaw tight. "Every frame of it." Trevor nodded. "I know a guy, former military techie. He can fix the corrupted files. Give me a couple of days." Before I could answer, a nurse walked in with a tray of pills and a look that said I should shut up and swallow something strong. She checked my chart, glanced at my bloodied knuckles, and said, "You're lucky you're breathing. 2 ribs cracked, a concussion, and a whole lot of bruising. Try not to start any more wars this week." Later that night, while Trevor was asleep in the chair, my phone buzzed on the table next to me. Unknown number. I answered, thinking it might be the hospital. The voice on the other end was low and cold. "If you want to walk again, Hargrave, drop it. You're not going to win against us." The line went dead. My grip tightened around the phone. Whoever they were, they just made one mistake, thinking I'd back down. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to burn their whole scheme to the ground. 2 days in the hospital felt like a week in solitary. The food was awful. The walls smelled like bleach, and the steady beep of machines did nothing for my temper. When Trevor finally rolled me out of there in a wheelchair, I was in no mood to play nice. The bridge was gone. My ribs hurt with every breath, and I had a voice in my head repeating Karen's smug face like a broken record. But the anger kept me sharp. It was the kind of anger I used to see in victims during my years as an investigator, the kind that makes you hunt for every scrap of truth. The first stop was Trevor's contact, a tech guy named Elijah. He looked like a hacker who'd been raised in a garage. All wiry frame, coffee-stained hoodie, and fingers that never stopped tapping. He plugged the body cam into his workstation without a word. For an hour, we sat there while he worked his magic, muttering about corrupted data blocks and frame recovery. Finally, he leaned back with a grin. "Got it. Cleaned, sharpened, and ready to ruin somebody's day." When I saw the footage, I felt my jaw tighten. It showed everything. Karen barking orders like she was leading a military op, the workers dismantling the bridge without a single safety barricade, and then the brawl clear as day. The sound was patchy, but we could hear Karen's voice. "Faster before he comes back." She'd cooked her own goose. We took copies of the video and backed them up in 3 places. I wasn't taking any chances. After that, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Dan Hardy, my old partner from my district attorney days. Dan left the DA's office years ago and now ran a private law practice. He picked up on the second ring. Hargrave. Damn, it's been a while. What kind of trouble are you in? The kind where a homeowners association just demolished my bridge and beat me half to death, I said. I've got video. I need someone who knows how to make the law bite. Dan laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Sounds like you found the HOA from hell. Email me everything you've got. We'll start there. That evening, I walked the edge of my property, limping slightly but determined. The river looked wrong without the bridge, just a gap of muddy banks and floating debris where my family's history used to stand. I picked up a splintered board from the shore, the one with my father's carving still etched faintly into the wood. I promised myself it wouldn't end like this. Karen, of course, wasn't sitting still. I started finding little things. Another notice stuffed into my mailbox, unsigned and full of threats. "You are liable for damage to community property," it read. Community property. The nerve. Then I spotted an SUV slowing near my driveway, the same white one I'd seen before. They were watching me, and I wasn't sure if they wanted to intimidate or provoke. Dan called back later that night after reviewing the footage. "Scott, this is more than vandalism. They assaulted you, trespassed, and acted under false pretenses. We're talking multiple criminal charges. But if the local sheriff is compromised, and I think he is, we'll have to push this at the state level." "Good," I said. "Push as hard as you can." The next morning, I drove down to the county clerk's office with Trevor. We wanted to confirm if any official permits had been issued for the demolition. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with a name badge that read Linda, scrolled through her computer, frowning. "No permits, no orders. Nothing on record about that bridge." She paused, glancing up at me. Whatever they did, it wasn't sanctioned by this office. That was the moment the picture started forming. It wasn't just Karen's power trip. This was a calculated move. I knew her type. She wanted me off my land, and she'd tear down anything that stood in her way. Well, I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. On the way back, Trevor leaned against the truck window. "You think this is just about the bridge?" I shook my head. "Number, it's about control. She wants me gone, and she's not working alone. We're going to find out who's pulling her strings." The local news station called me back less than 24 hours after Dan sent them the footage. Apparently, footage of an HOA president orchestrating an illegal demolition and a brawl makes for good television. A reporter named Kelly Mason drove up to my property in a beat-up Jeep, camera crew in tow. She was sharp, mid-30s, blazer over jeans, the kind of reporter who looks like she's done this dance before. "Mr. Hargrave," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "We saw the footage. We want to run this story, but I need more details. Tell me everything." I led her down to the ruins of the bridge. The scene was still raw, broken beams jutting out of the muddy bank, tire tracks from the excavator, and the faint reek of hydraulic oil. Kelly crouched down, snapping photos, shaking her head. "They didn't just demolish it," she said quietly. "They staged it like they had the authority." "They didn't," I replied. "No permits, no county orders. Nothing." Trevor stood nearby, arms crossed, his bruised face looking like a billboard for what happens when you cross the wrong people. He added, "They attacked us when we tried to stop them." Karen was there, giving orders. She thought she could get away with it. Kelly's camera guy captured every angle, every detail, including the board with my father's carving. I told her about the notices, the fake documents, and the SUV stalking my driveway. Her eyes narrowed as she jotted notes. "You know," she said, "Fox Hollow's HOA has been in the news before. Noise complaints, petty fines, but nothing like this. This feels bigger." It was bigger, and I could sense it. Later that day, Kelly called me from her station, voice tense. "We've been digging into public records. Karen's husband owns a development company. They've been snapping up foreclosed and undervalued properties for years. There's a pattern. Complaints filed, structures deemed unsafe, properties sold under pressure. It's all connected." Hearing that made my blood run cold. "So this isn't just about me." "No," she said. You're just the latest target. The news segment aired that night. The headline was blunt: HOA president accused of illegal demolition and assault. The footage rolled, Karen shouting, workers tearing down the bridge, Trevor and I fighting to hold ground. My name was all over the screen. I braced for backlash, but what I got instead was a flood of messages. People from the county, even from other states, reaching out with similar horror stories about HOA overreach. Not everyone was happy. Karen stormed onto the HOA's official Facebook page, claiming the video was heavily edited and that I was a violent recluse endangering community safety. She even suggested I'd stage the entire event to smear her good name. I had to laugh. Nothing says guilty like trying to rewrite reality. 2 days later, the pressure escalated. Trevor spotted a white pickup parked down the road, engine running, headlights off. He went out with a flashlight, and the truck peeled away like a spooked animal. "They're watching," he said when he came back inside. "They're rattled." I decided to rattle them harder. Dan suggested we file a formal complaint at the state level and attach the footage as evidence. Meanwhile, Kelly wasn't done digging. She called me the next morning, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Scott, we found someone who used to work with Karen's husband, a contractor. He says there were multiple cases like yours where property owners were harassed until they sold. I agreed to meet the contractor in a diner just outside town." The guy looked nervous, eyes darting around the room as if Karen herself might crawl out of the coffee pot. He told us about a couple down the valley who'd been convinced to sell after their driveway was mysteriously destroyed during a safety cleanup. Another family's shed was bulldozed under similar pretenses. It was a scheme, ugly and systematic. By the time I left the diner, I knew this was war. Karen and her HOA weren't just bullies, they were predators. And predators don't back down unless you make them bleed, figuratively or otherwise. That night, Trevor and I installed 2 new surveillance cameras, plus a drone with a motion sensor. If anyone so much as breathed near my land, I'd know. Standing on the porch, watching the drone's red light blink in the dark, I made a promise to myself. This was going to end with Karen's empire collapsing like the bridge she tore apart. The segment on the evening news must have hit Karen like a hammer, because the very next morning I found a stack of papers shoved into my mailbox. A lawsuit. Fox Hollow Ridge Homeowners Association versus Scott Hargrave. The claims were laughable. Assaulting workers, obstructing a community safety project, defamation of character. They were throwing everything they could at me, hoping something would stick. I took one look at the thick packet and laughed so hard my ribs hurt. "They're trying to bury you in paperwork," Trevor muttered, flipping through the pages. "Good luck with that, Karen." Dan wasn't laughing when I sent him scans. "This is their counteroffensive," he said over the phone. "They're trying to create a narrative where you're the aggressor. We'll dismantle it, but it'll take time. Expect them to get nastier." He wasn't wrong. That afternoon, a sheriff's deputy showed up at my gate, all official looking, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Hargrave, we need you to come in for questioning regarding an assault complaint filed by Fox Hollow Ridge HOA," he said, voice stiff as starched linen. "We have statements from multiple witnesses that you initiated the altercation during the bridge demolition." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Statements from whom? Karen and her gang of unlicensed wreckers. I handed him a USB stick with a copy of the video. "You might want to look at actual evidence instead of listening to fairy tales." The deputy's expression tightened, but he took the drive and left with a curt nod. Something told me it wouldn't make a damn difference. Not with Karen pulling strings. Meanwhile, Trevor noticed we weren't just being watched anymore. We were being provoked. Twice in one day, a black SUV rolled past the property, honking and slowing down like they were checking our defenses. That night, our security cameras picked up 2 figures creeping near the tree line, shining flashlights at my driveway. We stepped out with a pair of shotguns just for show, and the intruders bolted before we could get a good look. But the cameras caught their faces. One of them was the same guy who'd manned the excavator on demolition day. I forwarded the footage to Dan, who was already sniffing out corruption in the sheriff's office. "Scott, you're not going to like this," he said during our next call. "I've found financial ties between Karen's husband's company and some county officials, including Sheriff C. Mason. Donations, favors, the whole dirty package." "Explains a lot," I said, pacing my porch. "The way they keep painting me as the villain." Dan sighed. "We need to escalate this beyond the county. I'm preparing formal complaints for the state attorney's office. But we need more. We need someone inside their circle who's willing to talk. Almost as if on cue, Kelly, the reporter, called with news. "We attended the latest HOA board meeting," she said, excitement in her voice. "We've got a hidden mic recording of Karen ranting about how you won't last the winter on your property if you keep resisting. It's ugly. She's starting to crack." Trevor, ever the Marine, just grinned. "Sounds like we're getting under her skin." That's good. People like her make mistakes when they're angry. But the danger was real, and it came closer than I expected. One evening, Trevor drove to town for supplies, only to get cut off by a pickup truck with no plates. 3 guys jumped out, crowbars in hand. By the time he fought them off and made it back, his arm was swollen and blood ran from a cut across his temple. He'd managed to land a few punches, but the attack was deliberate, a warning. We checked the dash cam footage, and sure enough, the same black SUV appeared right before the ambush. I sent everything to Dan and Kelly. "They're escalating," I told them. "If they think they can scare us into silence, they're about to find out who they're dealing with." That night, while Trevor sat with an ice pack on his shoulder, I stood on the porch, staring at the darkened ridge where Fox Hollow sat. Their lights twinkled like nothing had happened, like they weren't running a racket. But I knew better, and I wasn't going to let them take another inch. Dan Hardy didn't waste any time. Within 3 days, he had filed 3 separate lawsuits on my behalf, one for personal injury and assault, one for unlawful demolition and property damage, and one that named Karen Delacroix, her husband's construction company, and Fox Hollow Ridge. HOA in a conspiracy to commit fraud. He called me early that morning, his voice sharp with purpose. "Scott, I've done this dance before. We're not just defending. We're going on the offensive. I'm submitting everything we have, including the body cam footage and the security videos. Once the state attorney gets a whiff of this, Karen will be the one answering questions." He was right. The footage was devastating. The state attorney's office responded quickly, requesting all materials and opening a formal inquiry. When Kelly Mason aired her second report, this one featuring clips of Karen openly threatening me at an HOA meeting, the story exploded. Suddenly, Fox Hollow Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a symbol of HOA corruption plastered all over local news. Karen tried to counterattack, of course. She stood in front of a podium during a press conference, wearing a white blazer and her signature crocodile smile. "We are being harassed by a violent individual," she declared to the cameras, and the HOA was acting in the best interests of the community. But while she was smiling for the news, her world was collapsing behind the scenes. Dan had subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, and the numbers painted a dirty picture. Funds funneled to shell accounts, maintenance projects that looked suspiciously like payouts to local officials, and unexplained safety inspections that always ended with a property being devalued or sold off. Meanwhile, Trevor and I kept a close watch on the property. We caught another attempt at intimidation late one night when 2 men tried to cut the wire on one of my cameras. The drone swooped in, spotlighting them like deer on an empty road. One of the men, the excavator operator, froze, hands up. The other ran for the woods. We called the sheriff's office, and to our surprise, 2 deputies showed up and actually arrested him. It wasn't Mason, it was one of the younger guys who looked like he wasn't yet bought by Karen's circle. For the first time, I felt a small shift in momentum. Dan pushed for a state-level injunction, effectively blocking the HOA from any further community projects until the investigation was over. At the same time, he filed a motion to include several county officials in the suit after we discovered a trail of payments from Karen's husband's company, consulting fees that smelled like bribes. By the end of the week, the state attorney's office had launched a joint investigation with financial crime specialists. Then came the day Karen didn't see coming. I was sitting on my porch when my phone buzzed. It was Kelly, nearly breathless. "Scott, it's happening. They're serving warrants right now. Karen, 2 of her board members, and a county inspector. I'm on the scene." I flipped on the local station, and there it was. Live footage of Karen Delacroix being led out of her McMansion in handcuffs, her perfect hair undone, shouting about how she'd sue every last one of us. The irony was almost too sweet. Dan called minutes later. The judge approved the arrests and froze the HOA's accounts. We've got them cornered. For all the chaos, I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. Karen's husband and his construction company still hadn't been touched, and I doubted he'd go down quietly. "She's going to fight back with everything she's got," I told Trevor. He shrugged, sipping his coffee. Then we hit harder. "We're not exactly amateurs, Scott." The next morning, I walked down to where the bridge used to stand. The river had swallowed most of the wreckage, but pieces of my grandfather's handiwork still clung to the muddy bank. I picked up a plank, feeling the worn wood in my hands, and I realized this wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about making sure no one ever pulled something like this again. Not here, not anywhere. The trial took months, but when it finally began, the courtroom was packed. Karen sat at the defense table wearing a pale gray suit that was probably meant to make her look sympathetic. It didn't work. Her lawyer, a slick guy with too much gel in his hair, tried every trick in the book, dismissing the video as unverified, painting me as some angry loner with a vendetta, even suggesting that Trevor and I had staged the entire demolition. But the evidence was like a freight train, unstoppable and loud. Dan Hardy tore their case apart piece by piece. He presented the video footage, the county records showing no permits, the contractor testimony about similar schemes, and, most damning of all, the HOA's own financial records that revealed payments to county inspectors and even a few deputies. When Dan displayed the payment trail on a screen, complete with Karen's signature authorizing community safety projects that led to forced property sales, you could practically see the life drain from her face. Trevor testified, his arm still bearing the faint scar from the attack. He told the jury exactly what happened that day on the bridge, his calm, steady voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Kelly's investigative report was also submitted, including interviews with other victims of HOA intimidation. It became clear this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a full-blown criminal enterprise. The verdict came down like thunder. Karen Delacroix was found guilty on multiple counts: conspiracy, fraud, destruction of private property, and aggravated assault. She was sentenced to 13 years in prison, her pleas for leniency drowned out by the sound of the judge's gavel. 3 of her board members received shorter but still significant sentences. As for the county officials who had taken bribes, they were promptly fired and faced their own criminal investigations. Even Sheriff Mason wasn't untouchable. He was suspended pending federal review. Karen's husband tried to distance himself, but Dan had anticipated that. Within weeks, his construction company's licenses were revoked, and their assets were frozen under a civil suit that would eventually bleed them dry. For me, the victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. They'd tried to erase a part of my family's history, and they paid dearly for it. With the compensation from the court, $920,000 in damages, I set about rebuilding the bridge. I hired the best craftsmen I could find, men who understood the value of tradition. We didn't just patch up what was left. We built a new bridge that mirrored my grandfather's design, right down to the carved handrail. It took nearly a year, but when it was done, it stood stronger than ever. Steel reinforcements hidden beneath layers of wood, certified to withstand anything short of an earthquake. On the day we unveiled it, Trevor and I stood on the banks of the river, the sun setting behind the ridge. A bronze plaque gleamed at the entrance. This bridge stands as a testament to family, resilience, and the right to defend what is ours. Trespassers beware. Justice lives here. We shared a quiet toast with a couple of beers, no cameras, no reporters, just the sound of the river and the creak of fresh timber. Trevor grinned, tapping the wood with his knuckles. "Your granddad would be proud," he said. I nodded, staring at the bridge. This time, no one's tearing it down. Not while I'm breathing. Life hasn't gone completely back to normal. The HOA is gone, disbanded and disgraced, but I keep my guard up. A drone patrols the skies above my property, and the cameras are always rolling. I've learned that peace isn't something you ask for. It's something you defend, every day. As I walked across the new bridge that evening, I realized something. Karen and her crew thought they could take my land, my history, and my dignity. But all they did was make me fight harder, and in the end, they built their own prison, one brick of arrogance at a time.